This video explains why President Vladimir Putin is not the prophesied Prince of Russia mentioned in the Bible in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 and why I am discussing it. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. One of the prophets to whom Germans and German masqueraders pay heed to thinks President Putin is the Prince of Russia, prophesied in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 in the Bible, who will lead a 200 million man army of the eastern nations against Europe and destroy it, and will later lead an almost equally large army against the descendants of the Americans and British, who will be living in Jerusalem and Israel after the return of Jesus Christ to earth. That is why I need to discuss this issue in this video. President Putin, in his reasons for Russia's special operations in Ukraine, stated four objectives. His first stated goal is to prevent the genocide of ethnic Russians. His second goal is the demilitarization of Ukraine. His third goal is the denazification of Ukraine. He accused the West of helping Ukraine develop biological and chemical weapons. His fourth objective, therefore, is preventing development of biological and chemical weapons in Ukraine to be used against Russia. Then, last week, he made threats against Nazis in Russia itself who launch demonstrations against whatever actions he takes. Alexei Navalny is a prominent face among those Nazis operating in Russia. In a speech on Wednesday, March 16, 2022, according to the New York Post and CNN, he said in a transcript published in English by the Kremlin, "The West tore off its mask of decency and began to act crudely, showing its true colors. One cannot help but remember the anti-Semitic Nazi pogroms in Germany in the 1930s, and then pogroms perpetrated by their henchmen in many European countries that joined the Nazi aggression against our country during the Great Patriotic War. The West will try to rely on the so-called fifth column, on the national traitors, on those who earn money here with us but live there. And I mean live there not even in the geographical sense of the word, but according to their thoughts, their slavish consciousness," Putin said. The fifth column usually refers to sympathizers of the enemy during a war. He continued, "Such people who by their very nature are mentally located there and not here are not with our people, not with Russia," he continued. But any people, and even more so the Russian people, will always be able to distinguish true patriots from scum and traitors and simply spit them out like a gnat that accidentally flew into their mouths, spit them out on the pavement. I am convinced that such a natural and necessary self-purification of society will only strengthen our country, our solidarity, cohesion, and readiness to respond to any challenges. CNN reporter Angela Devan wrote, "While some Russians support the war, many others are protesting against it in the streets, fully aware that they will be rounded up by heavily armed police, even for the most peaceful of demonstrations." His speech Wednesday hinted darkly that those Russians who do not side with him were in essence traitors. Chilling words in a country where mass political repression and the Gulag system are still within living memory. To counter the reporting in the West about many protesters in Russia against the war, whereas only some supported, as Angela Devan has written, President Putin on Friday addressed a very large cheering crowd of around 250,000 Russians who support the war at the Luzhniki Arena, Moscow's largest stadium, which was covered with posters that read, for a world without Nazism. There have been no rallies of even 50,000 protesters in Russia. The war apparently is not going according to President Putin's plan, as it has already taken nearly a month and Russia has lost more than 7,000, or by some estimates nearly 10,000 soldiers, and Ukraine is putting up a surprisingly stiff resistance. I had predicted that if Russia starts taking many casualties, the war could turn ugly with many civilians dying in Ukraine. However, it seems Russia is still restraining itself against wanton killing of tens of thousands of civilians. According to reports, the civilian casualties so far in Ukraine have been under 1,000. If the war drags on, as it seems quite likely, civilian casualties as well as Russian soldier casualties could rise. Though Russia has not been able to force Ukraine to capitulate quickly, the war still meets Putin's objectives as long as it drags on. Russia has taken control of nuclear plants, which will probably prevent installation of nuclear weapons. It can monitor entry of weapons into Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has indicated that Russia will start attacking lorries suspected of carrying weapons from the west into Ukraine. In addition, Russia can prevent the use of biological and chemical weapons as it can easily control the biolabs. Russia is also preventing the genocide of ethnic Russians in the Donbass region as long as the war continues. It is also quite possible Russia is targeting civilians where Nazis or German masqueraders are concentrated in Ukraine. It would not have been difficult for Russia to gather that intelligence as there are many ethnic Russians living in Ukraine. However, it will be impossible to conduct surgical strikes to liquidate only Nazis in Ukraine. Ethnic Ukrainians will likely suffer some civilian casualties. Thus, even if the war drags on as seems likely, Russia will still continue to meet its objectives except for the total denazification of Ukraine. That would be possible only with a total victory and then extermination of Nazis in Ukraine. President Putin rightly stated in his speech on Wednesday that Russia needs self-purification of society, meaning denazification of Russia itself. Not only Ukraine and Russia need denazification, but the entire world needs denazification. Let the Nazis remain only in Germany. Ever since the atrocities of the German masqueraders or the Nazis in the United States came to light in 2000 and 2001, I have never wavered in my judgment that the United States and British Commonwealth nations need total denazification, meaning the extermination of all German masqueraders and their allies, man, woman, and child. Therefore, I am not at all chilled as Western reporters call President Putin's remarks on self-purification of Russian society chilling. It is the only sensible thing to do. In the United States, the Nazis murdered 9 to 10 million white Americans and caused around 30 to 40 million white babies to be aborted. But Russia has suffered much more at the hands of the Nazis than the United States. Lenin and Stalin were German masqueraders. Lenin was responsible for millions of Russian deaths. Stalin was responsible for 35 to 50 million Russian and Ukrainian deaths and the German masqueraders in Russia were responsible for more than 100 million abortions in Russia. This does not include murders that may have been committed in Russia after Stalin. Clearly, Russia needs denazification more than any other nation on earth. Those murders after Stalin would have been committed in the gulags. Therefore, I fully support President Putin's views of self-purification of Russia. I don't find them chilling at all. It's the right thing to do, as exterminating German masqueraders and their allies in the United States is the right thing to do in America. While almost the entire world condemns President Putin as the aggressor for invading Ukraine, the condemnation is based entirely on what people see on the surface. The German hand through the use of German masqueraders or Nazis living in Ukraine, with President Zelensky being the Nazi-in-chief, remains invisible. But President Putin sees that hand and has taken decisive action to protect Russia from German machinations and future nuclear or biological chemical weapons attack. In fact, Bible prophecy indicates that a biological and or chemical weapons attack on Russia and the East by the Germans will take place. Believe it or not, Bible prophecy plays an all important part in the Germans' decision making because Satan the devil pays heed to it. Revelation 9 verses 3 to 6 prophesies. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. This prophecy indicates weapons that don't kill human beings but torment them with extreme pain and suffering so that they would desire to die rather than endure the suffering. The suffering lasts a full 5 months. As best as we can see, uh, these are most probably biological weapons or chemical weapons being used. Daniel 11 verses 40 to 45 pinpoints the time when this attack takes place. Verse 44 states, But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and to utterly make away many. Verses 40 to 43 describe a war between German-led Europe, identified as the King of the North, against a Middle East-based King of the South. When this war is going on, the armies of the East begin mobilizing, as verse 44 indicates. That's when the Germans launch a preemptive strike against the forces of the East with biological and or chemical weapons described in Revelation 9 verses 3 to 6. The prophecy in Revelation 9 verses 3 to 6 is the impetus behind China and Ukraine developing biological weapons with the help of German masquerader scientists in America, with the U.S. funding arrangement by U.S.-based German masqueraders. Of course, Ukraine and China deny that they were developing biological weapons. But in my video dated April 21, 2021, titled Part 1, China must pay 10 trillion compensation to the United States alone for causing COVID-19. I identified from published sources the published reports the Harvard scientist Charles Lever as the one who worked in the biolab in Wuhan, China, that bioengineered the bioweapon that escaped the lab intermittently and caused COVID-19. Lever has been charged with the crime. Most likely similar arrangements with the help of US-based German masquerader scientists and American funding to the tune of $200 million, as President Putin has accused. That is, similar arrangements have been made in Ukraine to develop biological weapons. It's absolutely incredible how German masqueraders in America, Britain, Ukraine, Russia, and in all other countries are taking all the risks while it costs Germany nothing at all. Unfortunately, German masqueraders are willing to perish, whereas Germany will get all the benefits of victory in war. This example illustrates how Germans pay very close attention to prophecy and try to fulfill it in their own way, with minimum danger to themselves. Prophecy says that German-led Europe will attack the Eastern nations with a preemptive strike of biological weapons. They don't want the weapons launched from Germany, as they don't want Germany to face retaliation. That's why they chose Ukraine to develop the biological weapons, as the retaliation will then be against Ukraine. Since Russia is next door to Ukraine, it's easier to unleash the weapons from Ukraine. Since the prophecy concerning biological weapons involves Russia, that's why the prophecy concerning Prince of Russia is important. One of the prophets, Gerald R. Flurry, the leader of the Philadelphia Church of God, or PCG, To whom the German masqueraders pay heed to is prophesying that President Putin is the prince prophesied in Ezekiel 38 verses 1 to 6. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh Hashanah, and Tubal. With this identifies the prince of Russia, with Rosh identified with Russia's name Rus, Meshach identified with Moscow, and Tubal identified with the Russian city Tobolsk, and prophesy against them, and say, Thus is the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all its troops, the house of Togarmah from the far north and all its troops. Many people are with you. In a booklet titled The Prophesied Prince of Russia, Gerald R. Flurry has identified President Putin as the prophesied Prince of Russia. He believes that the first two verses of Ezekiel 38 are talking about he, that is Gerald Flurry himself, being the Son of Man, warning the Prince of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Here is what he writes in his booklet. The Son of Man, God's human messenger, meaning Gerald Flurry himself, is to identify the prince. Unless he knows who the prince is, God's messenger cannot deliver the message against him. God's watchman, meaning Gerald R. Flurry himself, warned the nations of Israel in particular about the danger of Russia and China and how events in these nations are all going to end. God specifically warns three nations of Israel: America, the British peoples, and the Jewish state in the Middle East. Essentially, what this PCG leader is claiming that he is the watchman or Son of Man asked to prophesy against Putin, whom he identifies as the Prince of Russia, and warn the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel about the danger they face from him and from China. The booklet continues. Verses 1 to 2 begin to be fulfilled before the Great Tribulation, the day of the Lord and Jesus Christ's second coming. But you study these scriptures alongside current events revealing modern Moscow's imperialist direction, you see that Russian President Vladimir Putin could well be the Prince of Rosh. We strongly believe he is. Ezekiel's command from God is to prophesy against him, that is, a single individual. These verses are being fulfilled this very moment, meaning by what he has written in the booklet. There has to be a type of Ezekiel here today to deliver that message. Gerald R. Flurry is implying that he is the type of Ezekiel fulfilling this prophecy. Around AD 90, the Prince John, the Apostle John, recorded an amazing prophecy, and the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. This is in Revelation 9 verse 16. That means an army of 200 million men. That is more people than were alive in the world when that prophecy was recorded. This is an end time prophecy, and we are certain to see fulfilled very soon. The Bible refers to this ancient confederacy as the kings of the East in Revelation 16 verse 12. Gerald R. Flurry then writes, I believe Ezekiel 38 verse 2 actually revolves around the prince leading the 200 million man army, which includes China and other nations. But the two key nations are Russia and China. Gerald R. Flurry thus identifies President Putin as the Prince of Russia, who will lead a 200 million man army of the East against Europe. He continues, God is going to use this colossal Asian force to confront the military of a united German-led Europe, which will also be on the scene at this time. It will obliterate Europe, but not the main European armies which will have taken the Jewish state of Israel. Both these armies will meet to fight at Armageddon, the hill of Megiddo itself, but Christ will draw them to Jerusalem. They will be defeated when they fight against Jesus Christ. This is God's punishment on the Europeans for their sins, especially for their brutal treatment to his people Israel, as stated in Revelation 18 verses 5 to 6 and Revelation 50 verses 29 to 31. This immense war between European Asian forces will end at the return of Jesus Christ. But here is something shocking. Even after most of Earth's population has been personally afflicted by nuclear war and complete destruction, the survivors will still be unwilling to turn to God. Revelation 11 verses 15 to 16 show that as Christ descends to earth, the narcotic will be wrathful toward him. The nations will be wrathful towards him. What is left of the European and Asian armies will insanely join forces to fight against Christ when he returns. Revelation 17 verses 12 to 14 and Daniel 8 verse 25 prophesy that Christ will admonish these powers. The conclusion of that battle will mark the beginning of a peaceful and prosperous new age for the new earth. Gerald Flurry correctly identifies two blacks on Jerusalem, once before the return of Jesus Christ leading to his return, and then once after the return of Jesus Christ. He continues, if you study Ezekiel 38 and 39, you will see that much of this prophecy takes place after Christ's second coming. These chapters make plain that the end-time kings of the East will also play a key role in a second end-time war. The first occurs right at the return of Jesus Christ. The second is waved a few years after it. Ezekiel 38 makes plain that after Jesus Christ defeats the European and Asian armies in the battle at Jerusalem, he will allow the surviving Asian forces to return to their homelands. Ezekiel 38 verse 4 states, I, God, will turn thee back in the first Jerusalem battle. But in the second battle of Jerusalem, he destroys all their enemies, as we will see. Then Christ, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, will gather his scattered people, the end-time descendants of Israel, around Jerusalem. He will start his global restoration by cleansing and cultivating the surrounding area. As the years go by, the Asian powers begin to covet the wealth they see in Jerusalem. They see a prosperous but unarmed area, and in another burst of rebellion decide they want to take it. So they must muster their forces for one final attempt to overthrow Christ's rule in this holy city. God allows them to come into the Holy Land, but their plan is doomed. After many days they shall be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people, against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely all of them. After many days, a few weeks, years perhaps, God and his allies launch another attack on Jerusalem. This course after Israel has been brought back from the sword and is ruled by Christ from Jerusalem. This second attack by a Gog-led army might involve a somewhat smaller number of soldiers than the earlier 200 million man army. However, the populations of these Asian neighbors are so large that even after their defeat in the first battle at Jerusalem, it may take very, very long time for them to replenish their numbers and to be back around 200 million. While I agree with Mr. Flurry's interpretation that two attacks take place in Jerusalem, my understanding of the sequence of events differs slightly, which I have explained in detail in my ebook, Word and Bible Prophecy. available free on my religion website www.churchofgodmessage.com. Anyone interested in exploring the subject further can read my ebook, but which is World and Bible Prophecy. But my purpose in this message is to discuss whether President Putin is the Prince of Russia prophesied in Ezekiel 38 and 39. My answer is that President Putin is not the Prince of Russia prophesied in Ezekiel 38-39. However, he may or may not be the man heading the 200 million man army that fights Europe. The reason why I believe President Putin won't be Prince of Russia prophesied in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is that this prophecy takes place entirely some years after the return of Jesus Christ, whereas the attack of the 200 million man army takes place just before the return of Jesus Christ. The problem with Gerald Flurry's interpretation of prophecy is that he gets hung up on the identity of various nations and kings prophesied in the Bible. In the 1920s and 1980s, God's church had set its eyes on Franz Joseph Strauss as being the leader of Germany who will fulfill the role of the King of the North or the German leader of Europe, as prophesied in Daniel 11 verse 40. He died in 1988. We also thought that Otto von Habsburg, the Archduke of Austria, was another candidate for being the King of the North, but he died in 2011 AD. Now, Gerald R. Flurry has set his sights on Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, the German businessman and politician of the Christian Social Union, as his best candidate for becoming the German leader to fulfill the role of the King of the North. Gutenberg does not seem to be close to becoming Chancellor of Germany. Gerald Flurry has also been prophesying for decades as the leader of Iran being the King of the South in Daniel 11 verse 40, which states, "While I think it is a possibility that the leader of Iran could be the King of the South, it is quite probable that he will not be. A leader of Egypt is another candidate for fulfilling that role. Why? For fulfilling that role. Why? Because in the attack of the King of the North against the King of the South in Daniel 11 verses 40 to 43 state, the hand of the Lord shall not land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver and over all the precious things of Egypt." In the same way, Gerald Flurry has been prophesying that President Putin is the prophesied Prince of Russia in Ezekiel 38 and 39, who will be the head of the 200 million man army that will fight and destroy Europe, as well as be responsible for the recent attack on Jerusalem with a very large army some years after a return of Jesus Christ. I am, however, convinced that President Putin will not be the Prince of Russia prophesied who will attack Israelite nations. He is a Jew. By the time this prophecy is fulfilled, he will have been replaced as leader by an anemic Russian. Moreover, Russian, Chinese, and Eastern nations' attack on Israel and Jerusalem occurs sometime after the return of Jesus Christ, when Israelites were diving in prosperity that evokes strong envy to loot their wealth. It takes a generation or two to become that prosperous. My interpretation is that this attack takes place near the Jubilee year after Jesus Christ begins his reign. After this failed attack, all other nations are finally convinced that the one ruling in Jerusalem is indeed the Almighty God. They are then willing to listen to move to the lands to be allotted to them to separate the nations once more, as had happened just after the flood, which humanity rebelled against and set up their own civilization at Babylon in the Tower of Babel incident. To force humanity to comply with his order to spread out, God had to divide humanity into many languages. When this attack on Jerusalem occurs, Putin would have to be more than 100 years old, more than 120 years old, as this year he will be 70 years old. I doubt if he will live that long and still be leading Russia. Next question is, will Putin be the leader of Russia when the next attack of the 200 million man army on German-led Europe takes place? The answer is maybe or maybe not. We just don't know. I am reluctant to name leaders at this stage who will fulfill specific roles because our experience in doing that and setting dates has not been good, especially when Jesus Christ clearly stated in Matthew 24 verses 34 to 36, "Truly I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. But of that day and hour knows no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." That's why in the past we had to be disappointed and look sorry when prophecies were not fulfilled according to the dates we prophesied for them, or the men who we thought would become specific roles in prophecy died without fulfilling them. Could then President Putin still lead Russia when the attack of the 200 million man army takes place? Based on the referendum that passed on 2021, President Putin could remain president of Russia till 2036, and he would be 86 years old. It certainly seems that most of the end time prophecies will be prophesied by them. Just as speculating I don't set dates. Therefore, President Putin could be one of the leaders of the Eastern Alliance that launches a 200 million man army attack in Europe. Another problem with Gerald Flurry's sequence of end time events is that he still thinks each of the king of the north on the king of the south. Almost another problem with GRF's response of end time events is that he still thinks attack of the king and the queen on the king of the south occurs before the German-led Europe attack on America, British Israelite nations and Israel. But based on the revelation to me by an angel, the only message concerning the sequence of end time events I've received, you can find this information in my free ebook, God's Messages Delivered Through Angels, and the proof at http://444 churchofgodmessage.com. I put the attack of the king of the north against the king of the south during the Great Tribulation, that is, after the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel are defeated. The Germans tried to fulfill the prophecy of the king of the north attacking king of the south by setting up the ISIS crisis caliphate in Iraq, Syria. They wanted to attack and destroy it, and then attack the United States and British Commonwealth nations, but Russia did not guide them to do so. Apparently, they have finally accepted my sequence of events and are now concentrating on their attacks on the United States, Britain, and Israel. The war in Ukraine was provoked by Germany by ordering German masqueraders in Ukraine to learn and plan to attack the Donbass region and take it back from ethnic Russian rebels. Be ready to install nuclear weapons. Be ready to develop biological and chemical weapons with the guidance of the US-based German masquerader scientists. The Germans knew that it would evoke a strong Russian response to meet this threat to their security, and it has. The war is not going too well for Russia. But did you notice that just before Russia attacked Ukraine, the only weapons Germany committed to providing Ukraine was helmets? This was to send the signal to Russia that Germany would not support Ukraine, which would encourage President Putin to attack Ukraine. Putin attacked. Immediately, Germany agreed to provide much more military aid to Ukraine in the form of shoulder-fired rockets to destroy fighter jets and tanks. And of course, they also know that the German masqueraders in the United States and Britain would do the lion's share to to supply weapons to Ukraine that would stall the Russian army's advance into Ukraine. It would be very difficult for the Russian army to occupy and rule Ukrainian cities. So the Russian soldiers will sit on the outskirts of cities and resort to shelling while it has and will probably remain a long duration war of attrition. The Russian soldiers will sit on the outskirts of cities and resort to shelling while Ukrainian fighters attack them and destroy their equipment. It has and will probably remain a long duration war of attrition. To tie down Russian troops has been the German and Chinese goal from the very beginning. Then Germany and China, along with their Indian allies, will be free to attack the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel. That war will likely begin with a preemptive nuclear strike and simultaneously begin the civil war in our nations waged by German masqueraders and their allies. That nuclear strike literally could take place any day. We know for sure that Germany and China are not going to announce the day or the hour that they are going to launch their nuclear weapons. Could this be the world war that defeats the United States, British Commonwealth nation, and Israel? The only thing we know for sure is that this war will be devastating. It will lead to famines and diseases and much destruction in the United States, British Commonwealth nation, and Israel, due also to the Civil War. Ultimately, the USA, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel will be defeated. The time is really short because we have already crossed the 6,000-year mark since the creation of Adam and Eve. God has set in motion events to take over the kingdoms of the world under the rule of Jesus Christ. Thus, the time for fulfillment of all end time world events is almost at hand. In this scenario, Putin could survive and be one of the leaders of the 200 million man army because after the defeat of the United States, Britain, and Israel, all end time events will be fulfilled in a mere 3.5 years. But he will just be one of the leaders in the Eastern Alliance. Gerald Flurry is stating that President Putin will be the main leader based on the prophecy in Ezekiel 38:37. I believe that not to be the case because I believe that entire prophecy takes place after the return of Jesus Christ. President Putin won't be around by that time as Russia's leader. However, for the attack of the 200 million man army, he could be one of the leaders if he survives on Russia's side during the war and upheavals that take place. Before that, against just one of the eastern leaders, as Daniel 11:44 says, "But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him," meaning the king of the north. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. President Putin could be the leader of the North, and Japan, South Korea, and China could be among the leaders of the East mentioned here in the alliance. That's my view on how these end time event prophecies will be fulfilled. I do differ slightly in details from the interpretation of these prophecies by Gerald Flurry. I have provided the details of my interpretation in my book, World and Bible Prophecy, available free on my website www.churchofgodmessage.com. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. Some people do not have the time to go through the full length of videos. They find it more convenient to read the text of the video. Unfortunately, YouTube does not provide the facility to make the text of my videos available on YouTube. But Facebook fortunately does provide that capability. So I make the text of my videos available on my Facebook channel, which you can easily copy.